I'm about to cover Tier 1 mandatory upgrades, or more appropriately named fixes, for the Monoprice Mini Delta 3D printer. I'm also going to include some bonus upgrades that are not really mandatory but deserve some consideration, especially in the context of some of the mandatory upgrades. If you don't want to listen to me explain everything, just go to the video description and go through all of the links to get your parts. Now, I'm not using the term mandatory lightly. All of these upgrades, not including the bonuses, are to prevent the stock printer from suffering damage or to prepare for imminent damage. In other words, I don't care if you are happy with your 100% stock machine. These are necessary fixes. These are not performance upgrades unless it just happens to be a happy side effect for fixing a bigger problem. Even the really cool bed leveling upgrades I've covered in other videos probably fall in Tier 2 or Tier 3 depending on your opinions. So big warning going into this, the stock Monoprice Mini Delta 3D printer has pretty crappy dimensional accuracy. Therefore, if you have not fully calibrated your dimensional accuracy, you may need to apply a scale factor, usually somewhere between 2 to 3% in the XY plane after correcting M92. To get the parts to fit appropriately, you might also have to print the parts one at a time, see if it fits, and then if it doesn't fit, measure it and adjust the scale factor accordingly. So, quick overview, not ranked in any particular order. Number 1, power button or power strip. 2, a very specific SD card with an optional extension cable. 3, Bowden coupler / connector clips. 4, riser feet with bonus consideration to the bed hole cover and a fan resistor. 5, trash shields. And number 6, the Extruder Bowden coupler fix. So, let's get started here. Number 1, buy a cheap power strip from Harbor Freight. If you plug and unplug your printer from the barrel connector, stop it. That creates scary sparks that will eventually wear out the barrel connector port on the mainboard if you keep doing it. Instead, until you can get around to buying a power strip, plug and unplug the printer from the wall. Some people get fancy with smart outlets or custom buttons, and that's okay. Just keep in mind that if you decide to buy an inline power switch specific to the power supply, that it may not work if you decide to or are forced to change the power supply later. Meanwhile, smart plugs and power strips are always super awesome. Right now, I'm using a TP-Link smart strip for all 3 of my 3D printers, along with a super convenient Octoprint plugin. Number 2, spend a few bucks on a known working SD card. I know this can be a tough sell to you because your factory shipped SD card is currently working. However, these are usually Chinese factory rejects that are of poor and or counterfeit quality. If you don't know what that means, just Google counterfeit SD card. Eventually, some things may still print fine while others won't. The scary thing here is that when the card decides to start failing, it will randomly start corrupting G-code, and the printer will try to blindly follow that corrupted G-code as it prints. When that happens, all bets are off as to how the printer decides to spaz out. Hopefully it doesn't break anything in the process. So why buy one of these specific SD cards? Well, because on top of what I just said, this printer is super picky about what SD cards will even work with it. Also, just because it works for printing does not mean that it will work for flashing firmware should you find yourself needing or wanting to do that. In other words, the bootloader and the main application use different SD card drivers. So yeah, some people may suggest special formatting workarounds, and I used to be one of them, but that does not always work. Or maybe it works several times before it just stops working one day. My advice is to just spend a few dollars and be done with it. The guy who maintains the wiki runs a shop selling Monoprice replacement parts, so he deals with a lot of these machines. He's a solid dude, and I trust his judgment. I bought the 8GB card, and it works just dandy. Now, some of you may be asking why you may need this if you're printing over USB. Well, sometimes USB has problems and you might want to check if the same file prints okay via SD card. Also, firmware flashing. Now, optional bonus. It also may not be a bad idea to buy an SD card extension cable. I've not heard too many reports of the SD card slot on the mainboard going bad, but if I was planning on doing the SD card shuffle often, I would buy this. Number 3. Bowden connector clips on both ends of the Bowden tube. This is a recent addition to my suggestions, but I'm putting them up higher on this list because A, they're really small so you can print them quite quickly. B, these might be enough on their own to prevent the crappy Extruder Bowden coupler from breaking super quickly. This is just a hypothesis at this point, so I'm still going to suggest that you print or buy something to address the crappy Extruder coupler later on in this video. C, they help hold the Bowden tube securely in place, leading to less wear and tear on the PTFE tube. D, as an added bonus, they might allow you to get away with less retraction. I have not tested this, but the uploader makes the claim on Thingiverse, and it makes sense to me that if the Bowden tube isn't shifting around, then maybe you don't need as much retraction. Number 4, riser feet. You might even want to play it safe and just stick books or foam or something under each tower leg to provide clearance while you do your initial prints. Electronics cooling was an afterthought on this machine. The original units did not even have fans in the case until some consumers started experiencing problems with the stepper drivers overheating. To address this, Monoprice/Malian added an overpowered case fan inside the machine. However, there's not enough clearance underneath the printer for this fan to be fully effective. I guess the manufacturer did not want to update the packaging to account for new legs. Anyways, depending on how long your prints last and your room temperature, you may start experiencing random layer shifts and or electronics overheating. Better safe than sorry. There are many options out there that are 100% 3D printable, but they may or may not require some aftermarket sized M3 screws. Ace Hardware is usually good about carrying metric screws. Dennis has also recommended standalone feet that you can purchase. And, bonus points if you can add vibration dampening material on your feet. Less rattling is good for both part longevity and reducing ghosting. I found some good packing foam in a piece of furniture I ordered. And I went and I glued to the bottom of some feet that I had printed. In retrospect, this foam was thick enough that I probably could have just glued it directly to the printer without the 3D printable feet. So now, bonus upgrades. When it comes to improving electronics cooling, some people are more concerned about their bed heater than they are about their mainboard frying. To help alleviate those concerns, print this free bed hole blocker. If you don't have magnets, just use some sort of non-conductive tape, such as Gorilla Tape, to hold it in place. The important thing here is to attach it from the inside of the electronics enclosure. It is not recommended to add unnecessary upgrades in between the metal build plate and the base because of potential interference with the bed leveling switches. Similarly, with added riser feet, you can now safely slow down the electronics cooling fan by soldering a resistor in series. My soldering skills are kind of laughable, so just check the video description for more information on that. Also, by slowing down that fan, you might also increase its life. Number 5, trash shields. Looking at the print area, there are 3 paths down into the stepper motors, belts, drive pulleys, and maybe even the electronics enclosure if you're super unlucky. You don't want filament trash parts or other debris to fall down into there and grind into the belts or something worse. It shouldn't be too hard to figure out why that could be a bad thing. The fix is 100% 3D printable. Just do it. Number 6. The Extruder Bowden coupler fix. I know some people are going to give me grief for putting this on here last because they have felt the pain of this happening mid-print. However, I felt okay putting this last because I have a good feeling that the Bowden connector clips I suggested earlier will buy you enough time to make it this far down the list. Like really, I feel like you should be tackling this entire list as soon as you make sure that your printer works. If you bought your printer off of Kickstarter, Indiegogo, generally earlier in production, or if you got a restock from one of those, then you may not have this issue because this downgrade came from the factory later in production. However, this problem comes up sometimes multiple times a week in the Facebook group. Basically, this piece of crap connector breaks. And when it does, you can either replace your entire extruder, as is covered in Teaching Tech's video and maybe eventually one of mine, or you can deal with one of the many 3D printable fixes. My recommendation is to go ahead and print one of the 100% 3D printable options and keep it on standby for when your part breaks. You know, there's an entire Thingiverse collection full of options, which I showed you earlier. Some require additional parts, others don't. Figure out which one you like best and print it. If this has already happened to you, some people have held the tube in place with tape while they print the replacement part. And right now I'm on this make page, which you can also find linked in the collection I'm going to link. You know, click there to go to the make page where I tell you what kind of dimensions you should probably expect this particular replacement part to be printed at for it to fit and work. So, you know, definitely give this page a read. Now, just a sort of bonus tip, you know, go watch my routine maintenance video. You're eventually going to need some stuff to clean and lubricate the printer. Hopefully you don't need it straight from the factory, but who knows. So there you have it. You may need to scale the size of some of these parts in your slicer to get them to fit. Also, depending on how well your bed leveling is working, you may have to print just one part at a time in the center of the build plate. Anyways, print one, see if it fits, and then adjust accordingly if necessary. That does it. Goodbye.